Hey guys, tonight we slipped quietly back into the early 1900s, to a time when you didn't wake up to your smartphone alarm, but to the sharp clang of a servant's bell, or worse, the frigid air creeping in through the poorly insulated windows of your Edwardian home. The sun barely peeks through the heavy damask curtains, and already the day is being sorted along invisible lines, lines etched by class, gender, and an absurd number of social expectations. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I always love seeing where these stories reach. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stir under a layer of stiff linen sheets, your breath fogging in the icy air. If you're upper middle class or better, your room smells faintly of coal smoke and lavender. If you're below stairs, it smells more like damp wool and boiled onions from last night's stew. Regardless, you're up before you'd like to be, and unless you're part of the 1% with a staff of a dozen, your first act of the day might involve lighting your own fireplace. If you're one of the servants, you've already been up for hours. You swing your feet onto cold floorboards, no central heating, remember, and tug on your stockings. For women, this involves an elaborate routine of layers, petticoats, and maybe even a corset depending on your status. For working class men, it's scratchy wool trousers, a collar that will chafe until bedtime, and boots stiff enough to stomp bricks into submission. Your fingers are numb, the water in the jug is cold, and there's likely a thin layer of soot on everything. Coal fires were cozy, yes, but also messy, smelly, and everywhere. If you're living above stairs, you might hear the quiet shuffle of your maid entering with a scuttle of hot coals and the faintest trace of judgment. It's not personal, it's just that your boots are still muddy from yesterday's walk and she already has 3 fireplaces to lay before breakfast. Meanwhile, downstairs, if you're part of the servant class, you've already cleaned your mistress's chamber pot, trimmed the gas lamps, and blacked the hearth grates till your hands smell permanently of ash and metal polish. Your day started in a dim corner of the kitchen at around 5:30 a.m., stealing a sip of weak tea and trying not to wake cook. A mistake there might earn you a slice of sharp sarcasm to go with your stale bread. The average Edwardian home, especially in the middle-class neighborhoods mushrooming around cities like London or Liverpool, is rigidly stratified. Bedrooms sit stacked like a cake of social roles. The farther up you sleep, the more important you are. If you're a servant, your mattress is thin, your blankets are itchy, and your window, if you even have one, rattles in the wind. If you're a child, your nursery is painted in dull tones and policed by a nanny who believes fresh air is a moral good but emotions are not. This early morning routine is less about comfort and more about social performance. Even in private, you're being trained by habit, posture, silence, restraint. You learn to exist within the frame of respectability, even if it means tight laces and tighter expectations. Historians still argue whether the average Edwardian really believed in all these rules or merely played along to survive them. You brush your teeth with crushed chalk and salt. It's terrible. But hey, at least it's natural. Soap is made with beef tallow, your comb is likely bone, and your mirror is slightly warped from years of use, giving you a perpetually haunted look that fits the period perfectly. And here's a quirky detail you probably didn't expect: some upper-class Edwardians believed that sleeping with windows open, even in freezing temperatures, was essential for health. So yes, you might wake up with snow on your pillow and consider it a wellness trend. Edwardian goop, basically. Breakfast is coming, but not for you. Not yet. First, the boots need shining, the children need dressing, and the drawing room fire needs relighting. If you're lucky, you might snag a bit of yesterday's cold kippers on your way past the pantry. If not, well, there's always tomorrow's porridge. Maybe. It's a world wrapped in lace but stitched with soot. You're both charmed and chilled by it, with each creaky floorboard whispering, "Keep up or be left behind." And as you shuffle into your roles, whether lord of the manor or scullery maid, you realize something chilling: the day hasn't even really started yet. The breakfast bell doesn't ring for you. It rings for them. You're already on your second pair of coal-smudged apron ties, sweat beading under your cap despite the morning chill that still creeps through the drafty halls. Upstairs, the rich are yawning into Egyptian cotton pillows, contemplating whether they want eggs soft-boiled or poached. Down here, you're navigating a kitchen that smells like singed toast and stewing kidneys. It's not even 8 a.m., and the stakes are already sky-high, because heaven help you if the butter curls melt or the tea is 2 degrees too cool. You're working in what is generously called a scullery, really just a glorified stone dungeon with sinks, one tiny window, and walls that sweat in summer and freeze in winter. Water doesn't come out of taps hot unless you've boiled it first. You scrub yesterday's pans while hoping the cook doesn't notice your uneven technique. She will. She always does. If you're upstairs, things are better, but not as relaxed as you'd think. You don't get to stumble into the kitchen in pajamas and sip coffee while doom-scrolling. No, you sit at the breakfast table in stiff clothes with an air of somber ritual. Whether you're 10 or 70, you use the correct fork, butter your toast after breaking it, and never speak of anything unpleasant. That includes politics, indigestion, and whatever scandal Aunt Lavinia is embroiled in this week. Middle-class families aim to imitate the upper classes, even if it means pretending that having only one maid is normal. Breakfast might be porridge, kedgeree, or deviled kidneys. Tea is poured from real silver, even if the maid silently notes that the pot's bottom is wearing thin. Everything is clean, bright, and respectable, unless you look too closely and see the financial cracks hidden under all that lace doiliness. Meanwhile, you, dear working-class soul, are probably not seated. You're standing at a sideboard, waiting to be dismissed so you can have your breakfast, which will be cold leftovers eaten rapidly in a corner. And no, you don't get a break afterward. You still have the bedrooms to air out and the hall runner to beat. One odd bit. The toast ritual. Upper-class households didn't just eat toast, they worshipped it. Toast had to be evenly browned, cut into uniformed soldiers, and stacked just so. There was even a silver rack for it, designed to keep it dry and crunchy while ensuring it cooled just enough to avoid mouth burns. Historians still argue whether this obsession with toast aesthetics was about health, etiquette, or sheer edible vanity. If you're the man of the house, and let's be honest, you probably wouldn't be listening to this video if you were, your main breakfast duty is to grunt behind your newspaper and mutter about stocks. Children aren't allowed to speak unless addressed, and your wife is sitting beside you in silence, nibbling on toast and suppressing every real thought she's had since 1897. For kids, breakfast is oddly militarized. You sit straight, use your knife and fork correctly, and don't speak unless quizzed on Latin homework. If you're a boy, there's a faint whiff of future expectations in every mouthful: inheritance, school ties, cricket matches. If you're a girl, there's embroidery practice after this. Hooray! Back downstairs, you finally sneak your own breakfast, dry bread, weak tea, and maybe a rash of bacon if cook is feeling generous or distracted. You're leaning against a cold brick wall, chewing quickly, because there's a silver tray that needs polishing and a rug that hasn't been beaten since Tuesday. You're not even halfway through the day. And already, you've learned something essential about Edwardian life: food isn't just food, it's status, control, and silent warfare served on porcelain. You go through the motions, knowing that someone, somewhere in the house is already complaining about the marmalade being too tart, while you're counting the minutes before the next bell rings. Breakfast may be the most important meal of the day, but in Edwardian England, it's also one of the most exhausting. Getting dressed was practically a sport. Not a fun one, either. More like competitive origami with buttons, pins, and an unhealthy dose of social anxiety. You start your post-breakfast prep in front of a chilly washstand mirror that warps your reflection just enough to make you question whether your collar is crooked or your face is. The gas lamps are still hissing softly from earlier, and outside, the coal-smudged sky offers a half-hearted sort of daylight. But the real storm is just beginning, getting ready. If you're a woman in Edwardian England, you're about to enter battle, with fabric. First, the underthings. You wriggle into a chemise, then possibly bloomers, then corset, then a corset cover, then a petticoat, then maybe another petticoat depending on your station and moral standing. It's less like dressing and more like layering yourself into a walking moral statement. You're not even at the dress yet. The corset alone is an ordeal. Tight enough to encourage good posture, loose enough that you don't faint on the stairs, unless you're upper class, in which case a dramatic faint can be quite fashionable. There's a whole system of tugs and hooks, and unless you have a maid, who knows her way around a busk and a lace pull, you're stuck twisting like a cinnamon roll trying to reach the impossible. Your ribs creak. Your waist whittles. Your lungs sigh. And then, only then, you get to the actual clothes. A blouse with pin tucks, maybe a sailor collar. A skirt that brushes the ankles and weighs roughly as much as a sack of flour. Tiny buttons run down the sleeves, mocking your stubby fingers. And don't forget the belt. Always the belt. If you're a man, your ordeal is less layered but no less frustrating. You button into a stiff shirt with a detachable collar, the kind held on by metal studs that always vanish into the floorboards when you need them. Then a waistcoat. Then a tie or cravat, depending on how much you want to suffer. Historians still argue whether the Edwardian man really liked this whole three-piece suit routine, or if they were all just trying to outstiff each other like woolen peacocks. Shoes are polished, because heaven forbid your boots don't blind people in the morning sun, and gloves are not optional if you're stepping out. Yes, gloves. Even in July. Children don't get off easy either. Little boys are in sailor suits until they're roughly old enough to vote, and girls are trussed up in stiff pinafores and boots that take 10 minutes per lace. If you're from a working-class family, you've probably got hand-me-downs several sizes too big. If you're lucky, they don't still smell like the previous sibling. For servants, uniforms are the uniform of oppression. Housemaids wear black with white aprons, often starched until they can practically stand up by themselves. Your morning may involve being scolded not for your work, but for a slightly wilted collar or a frayed hem. You don't own many clothes. And the ones you do own, you're expected to wear invisibly, like stagehands in a never-ending play about other people's comfort. There's something almost tragic about how much of your daily time is spent getting dressed for other people. Whether it's for social calls, work, or just to be proper, appearance is everything. A rumpled cuff might suggest you're lazy. A mismatched button. Moral decline. And if you're seen outside without a hat. Scandal. One curious little fashion footnote: some wealthier women used live-in ladies' maids whose only job was to manage their wardrobe. That included brushing shoes, sewing underthings, ironing ribbons, and helping to remove hat pins without drawing blood. One Victorian-era journal even advised, a maid should remember her mistress's figure better than she remembers her own. Comforting. And now, finally, once you're dressed, gloved, buttoned, tied, pinned, and corseted, you can face the day. Sort of. You can't lift your arms above your shoulders. Your back aches from the corset. Your shoes are either too tight or too loose. And you've got sweat rolling down your back, despite the frosty windows. Still, you take one last look in the mirror, if you have one, and step into the hallway. Because in Edwardian England, being presentable isn't just about pride. It's about survival. The clothes don't just make the man, or woman, they keep you from being whispered about at tea. And trust me, those whispers are far more painful than any corset bone. The children are not all right. From the outside, Edwardian childhood seems almost charming: storybook nurseries, wooden toys, pinafore dresses, picture books, and nannies who tuck you in with a lullaby. But let's be honest, once you peel back the cozy wallpaper and move past the antique rocking horse, childhood in the Edwardian age is a polite little prison dressed in gingham and gilt. Let's start with where you live, the nursery. If you're middle or upper class, you're raised in a suite of rooms near the top of the house, far from your parents. You don't eat meals with them. You don't really see them. You're cared for by a rotating cast of nursemaids, governesses, tutors, and possibly a surly French woman hired solely to correct your accent. Your mother visits you occasionally, usually to inspect whether your manners or posture have improved. Your father. He might wave at you once a week. And yet, you're still luckier than the working-class children, who might already be on their way to a mill, or hauling sacks for pennies, or, if they're small and unlucky enough, shoved up a chimney with a wire brush and a terrified scream. Despite legislation like the 1870 Education Act, which tried to enforce school attendance, many poorer families had no choice but to send their children to work. So while some kids were memorizing Latin, others were memorizing how to dodge foremen and survive a 10-hour shift. But back to you, the hypothetical Edwardian child. Let's say you're 9 years old. Your day starts with a splash of cold water in a chipped porcelain basin. A nursemaid scrubs your ears until they shine, then buttons you into something stiff and moral-looking. If you squirm, you're reminded sharply that stillness is a virtue. You eat breakfast in the nursery, usually something dull and oat-based, and then it's lessons. Not playful, creative exploration, but long recitations. You learn by rote. Geography, French, handwriting, religion. One mistake in your spelling and your governess sighs like you've insulted Queen Alexandra personally. For boys, there's the looming promise, or threat, of public school, Eton, Harrow, or some other institution where you'll be whipped into a gentleman with icy baths, early Latin, and a strange affection for rugby. For girls, education is less academic and more decorative. You're expected to master embroidery, polite piano playing, conversational French, and the subtle art of not taking up space. You're being trained, very carefully, to become someone else's wife. One who doesn't faint at the sight of a fish fork. And the rules. Oh, the rules. No elbows on the table. No loud laughter. No sticky fingers. No speaking unless spoken to. No running in the halls. No questioning your elders. No second pudding. No showing preference between siblings, especially if you have a twin. Imagine that emotional minefield. Historians still argue whether all these rules were about keeping children moral, or just making them easier to ignore. Now here's a twisted little quirk. Children in upper-class families often had portrait days, where they'd be brushed, dressed, posed stiffly on velvet, and painted by an oil-splattered stranger. One unfortunate diarist recalled sitting for 8 hours in a sailor suit while being told to think happy thoughts. He said he spent the whole time contemplating what death might feel like. You do play, sometimes. If you're lucky, you have a rocking horse, a ball, or a wind-up toy. But even your play is curated. Too much noise is considered vulgar. You may get outdoor time, but it's highly supervised and involves things like skipping ropes, nature walks, or controlled frolicking. If you're poor, you play with sticks, street muck, and whatever the local butcher drops. If you're rich, you might have a governess who insists fun must have structure. Yes, fun. Structured. Emotionally, childhood in this era is like being slowly fossilized. You're not encouraged to express feelings, especially not anger, fear, or sadness. Crying is seen as weakness. Joy is acceptable, but only if it's quiet and doesn't muss your cuffs. By the time you're 13, you've likely learned to apologize for existing a little too loudly. And if you're a second son or an awkward daughter without marriage prospects, your path is already diverging. You're being nudged, gently but firmly, toward the clergy, spinsterhood, or lifelong dependency on your more successful siblings. No pressure. Of course, there's a darker thread running beneath all of this. Illness stalks Edwardian children like a polite shadow. Measles, diphtheria, tuberculosis, any of these could carry you off while the grown-ups murmured words like delicate constitution and pressed lavender-scented handkerchiefs to their mouths. Childhood death rates were high. Every family had a tiny gravestone somewhere. Toys were passed on. So were names. So were sorrows. So yes, the Edwardian child might look darling in sepia-toned photographs, clutching a doll or a book. But behind that stiff collar and that serious gaze, there's a child who hasn't seen their parents in days, who isn't allowed to laugh too loud, and who knows better than to track mud into the drawing room. You're not really raised to thrive. You're raised to behave. Ladies' lives measured in calling cards. You're dressed, corseted, combed, and probably a little winded, and now it's time to be available. Not emotionally, of course. Don't be ridiculous. In Edwardian society, availability means one thing, being seen, but not seen wanting. If you're a respectable lady of the middle or upper class, your social calendar is not only your pastime, it's your battlefield. And your ammunition. Calling cards. They're about the size of a playing card, embossed with your name in curling script, sometimes scented, always pristine. You carry them in a special case, mother of pearl, silver, or maybe faux tortoiseshell if you're a bit flashy. And you guard them with the same paranoid precision as one might a vial of poison, because the stakes are oddly similar, use it wrong, and someone's reputation dies. Today, you'll spend a good chunk of your free time going on social calls. You visit other ladies, usually within your own class or slightly above, never below, unless you're offering charity, and even then, it's less about kindness and more about being seen offering kindness. Each visit lasts exactly 15 minutes. That's not a suggestion, it's the law of the land, like gravity or lukewarm tea. You enter a sitting room, which always smells vaguely of potpourri and unresolved generational trauma, and you chat. Politely. About the weather. The garden. Perhaps the scandal at Lady Wrexham's musicale, but only if it can be implied, not stated. You sip tea, no slurping, eat a biscuit, no crumbs, and subtly place your card on the silver tray in the hallway when you leave. That card will later be used to determine whether your host will return the favor, or quietly cut you off the social tree like a dry branch. Forget someone's name. Fumble the teacup. Call a viscount's wife by her first name. You've just committed social arson. Your name will flutter down the grapevine with the force of a guillotine. Social life in Edwardian England is not glamorous. It's gladiatorial. Meanwhile, there's a sort of background hum of competitiveness that pulses beneath every interaction. That's because your entire value, as a woman, rests on how well you perform the performance of being a woman. You're judged not by your intellect, talents, or dreams, but by your posture, your modesty, your hosting skills, and whether your embroidery has even tension. Think Instagram, but the filters are lace gloves and emotional repression. And the worst part? You have to keep up. Because if you don't, your family might be socially demoted. That sounds silly, until you realize that marriage prospects, business opportunities, and even dinner invitations all hinge on how many cards show up in your little silver tray by the end of the week. Historians still argue whether these rituals were a genuine form of female networking, or just a gilded cage with better wallpaper. The truth is probably both. For many women, calling cards were power. Influence. Currency in a world where actual currency was controlled by their husbands, fathers, or brothers. But it was also exhausting, shallow, and deeply performative. Now, here's a quirky little fringe detail you'll enjoy. There was such a thing as mourning cards, black-edged calling cards used by women in grief. And no, you couldn't use regular cards during mourning, even if your grief was 6 months old and you were just visiting your sister-in-law. Etiquette dictated strict timelines, full mourning, half mourning, and, you may now wear lavender. God forbid your wardrobe or your paper products signal emotional healing before it was socially appropriate. And if you're unmarried and over 30, you've become what's called a surplus woman. A polite way of saying you're no longer marketable. You might still get invites, especially if you're good at pouring tea or whispering juicy gossip, but you're definitely considered extra. Like parsley on a plate. Decorative. Optional. A bit sad. Let's not forget, all this calling card drama is exclusive to the middle and upper classes. If you're a working class woman, your calls involve knocking on the factory foreman's door to ask for overtime shifts, not exchanging pleasantries over lemon sponge. Your reputation matters too, of course, but instead of fancy paper, it's measured in rent paid on time and neighbors who don't complain about shouting in the stairwell. In the end, the calling card is a symbol. It represents a life lived not for self-expression, but for strategic visibility. You exist in a web of appearances, trying not to be too forward, too quiet, too fashionable, too plain. You are a character in someone else's drawing room drama, and your only script is etiquette. So you tuck your skirt under your knees, smile at the hostess, and nod at the correct moment in a story about rose cultivation. Your card lies elegantly on the tray by the door. And as you step back into the street, you wonder, just for a moment, if anyone will actually call back. They probably will. Unless you use the wrong paperweight. Men in clubs, never in kitchens. You glance across the table as your husband, or father, or brother, folds his newspaper with a crisp snap. He checks his pocket watch, adjusts his tie with the air of a man who's terribly important, and announces that he's off to the club. Not a club, mind you, the club. You don't ask which one. You already know, it's the one with no women, no children, no domestic noise, and no smells of boiled cabbage. It's the place where Edwardian masculinity retreats to puff cigars and pretend it's solving the empire's problems, while carefully avoiding the actual problems at home. You don't go to the club. You don't even see the club. If you're a woman, your entry would cause pearl-clutching that could echo down Pall Mall. If you're working class, you pass the grand facade and wonder what they do in there that requires 4 butlers, 2 fireplaces, and a separate wine steward. If you're lucky, maybe you get to polish the doorknob. Inside, the Edwardian gentleman sinks into a red leather chair that has been sat in by 3 generations of self-satisfied men before him. A decanter is placed at his elbow. His gloves are whisked away by an unseen steward. And here, finally, he can breathe, deeply, smugly, free from the oppressive sounds of actual family life. This is his sanctuary. The London Club, the Reform Club, the Athenaeum. Places where politics are debated, stocks are speculated upon, colonialism is rationalized over brandy, and one's household troubles are kept safely at bay by thick velvet drapes. It's cozy. It's expensive. It's deeply male. And what's he escaping from? Well, you. The household. The children. The endless expectations that someone else is quietly managing behind the scenes, often at the cost of their own sanity. Because here's the truth, while Edwardian men are often praised for their stoic reserve and sense of duty, they also perfected the art of social absence. Historians still argue whether the club culture was a necessary escape from emotional repression, or just a self-serving boys' club built on fine whiskey and fragile egos. The average middle or upper-class Edwardian husband knew shockingly little about his children. Names? Sure. Ages? Rough guess. Teachers? Couldn't say. Allergies? That's what the nurse is for. His job, as far as society was concerned, was to provide financially and preserve the family's dignity in public. Emotional involvement? That was optional. And slightly suspicious. Now, in theory, a husband was the head of the household, but that rarely translated into actual housework. He didn't clean. He didn't cook. He didn't deal with the plumber or worry about whether the maid was caught pinching sugar cubes. Those burdens fell on women, often his wife, sometimes the housekeeper, occasionally his eldest daughter who'd been mistaken for management, simply by surviving past puberty. You might think the working-class Edwardian man would be more involved at home, after all, his wife likely worked too, and there was no staff. But the culture still held. He labored all day, came home bone-tired, expected hot food, silence from the children, and a moment to read the newspaper without interruptions. Kitchens were not his domain. Diapers even less so. Curiously, many Edwardian men took pride in not knowing how domestic things worked. Couldn't cook an egg. Excellent. Didn't know how to wash a shirt. Perfect. You'd never be mistaken for a tradesman. Dependence on female labor was a badge of class distinction. But here's a twisted little wrinkle. While respectable gentlemen wouldn't lift a finger at home, some of them did cook, at their clubs. Yes, you read that right. They'd hover around the club kitchen giving tips on how to grill a steak or season a sauce, puffing with amateur confidence and zero accountability. At home? Completely helpless. But at the club? Practically a gourmet genius. It was domestic cosplay, but with cigars and less risk of being asked to actually clean up afterward. Of course, not every man lived this way. There were those, especially among the lower classes, who did pitch in, who did know their children, who helped with sewing or boiled water for tea. But they were rare. And often quietly mocked for it. A man who scrubbed a floor or rocked a cradle was unusual. Suspicious. Possibly French. And here's where things get a bit unsettling, the emotional distance wasn't always benign. Many Edwardian men, especially in strict religious or military households, ruled with quiet cruelty. Not loud beatings, necessarily, but icy glares, withheld affection, arbitrary punishments. You could go your whole childhood longing for a pat on the head that never came. A boy might be raised by a governess, educated at a brutal boarding school, and trained to never cry, only to return home and find his father more familiar with the dog than with him. That stiff upper lip. It doesn't come from nowhere. It's inherited. And reinforced. And paid for in generations of silence. So tonight, when your Edwardian gentleman announces he's off to the club, understand that he's not just going for brandy. He's going for erasure. A clean, quiet space where he doesn't have to acknowledge the unpaid labor, emotional suppression, and household chaos that makes his life possible. And as the door closes behind him, leaving you standing there with the unpaid bills, squabbling children, and soup that's about to boil over. You wonder, not for the first time, what it's like on the other side of that velvet curtain. Probably quieter. Definitely warmer. But somehow, emptier. Lunch isn't leisure for the working class. It's just past noon, and the factory whistle screeches like a metal banshee echoing across a smog-choked skyline. You wipe your hands, greasy, blistered, maybe stained with coal dust or dye or fish guts depending on the job, and you get exactly 30 minutes to not collapse. This is lunch. Sort of. You're not sitting on a sunny bench with a linen napkin and a thermos of soup. You're squatting on a back step behind a warehouse, or huddled near a brazier behind the foundry, or leaning against a wall trying to avoid the rats that are also, technically, on their lunch break. And the food? Well, you brought what you could. If you're lucky, it's a slice of bread with dripping, beef fat hardened overnight and smeared on like butter. Maybe a cold potato. Maybe an eel pie with more bone than meat. If it's payday, you might have something decadent, like a pork bun. If not, it's crusts and hot tea brewed with water that may or may not taste like industrial runoff. Meanwhile, if you're one of the Edwardian elite, or even comfortably middle class, your lunch is served. You're seated, of course, in a room that smells faintly of lavender polish and beef consommé. A maid lays out silver, a dish of pickled walnuts is passed, and someone politely asks if the pigeon is overdone. You cut into your meat with practiced nonchalance while beneath your boots, someone else is skipping their meal entirely just to get through another shift. Back in the working world, lunch is anything but relaxing. You eat with one eye on the foreman, who times your break with the glee of a prison warden. If you're a domestic servant, you're stealing bites in the scullery between tasks, hoping no one hears the clink of your spoon. Maids often ate standing up, literally. Sitting was reserved for those who could afford leisure, and leisure was a luxury you couldn't even afford to imagine. There's a whole mythology of food in Edwardian society. For the upper classes, meals were events, curated and timed. Lunch might involve rabbit stew, delicate sandwiches, or veal served under puff pastry with a flourish. You sipped a light white wine or sherry, then excused yourself to the drawing room for coffee and scandal. Food was not just sustenance, it was identity, reputation, ceremony. But for the rest? Food was fuel. And sometimes, even that was a stretch. Historians still argue whether the average Edwardian laborer was chronically undernourished or simply efficiently lean. Either way, the diet of the working class was starchy, repetitive, and often downright grim. Bread. Tea. Bread. Tea. Maybe a slice of salted fish on Sunday. Maybe. Now here's a twisted little detail: some factory owners installed soup kitchens on site. Not out of charity, but to keep workers alive long enough to finish their shifts. These benevolent meals were usually watered-down broth and mushy vegetables served in tin bowls and consumed standing up next to loud signage reminding you to give thanks. Nothing builds morale like passive-aggressive soup. And let's not forget children. In working-class families, kids as young as 6 were already helping with deliveries, sorting buttons, or working as matchstick packers. Their lunches? A crust of bread, maybe a smear of treacle. No school cafeterias. No lunch ladies. Just a pocket full of crumbs and a stomach full of nothing. Even middle-class office workers fared little better. Clerks and typists, often paid miserable wages, ate in their desks if their bosses allowed it, cold pies, lukewarm tea, and silent resentment. You couldn't be seen eating something too nice, it suggested idleness. But too shabby, and you looked unambitious. The great Edwardian trap. Not too rich, not too poor, just invisible enough to survive. And the women? Oh, sweet listener, let's talk about the ladies' lunch, because even that had rules sharp enough to slice ham. Women were expected to eat delicately, quietly, and preferably not too much. In polite society, a visible appetite was a moral failing. You nibbled. You dabbed your lips with a lace napkin. You absolutely did not ask for seconds. One magazine advised women to eat modestly, lest your character be assumed to match your portion size. One quirky side note: there was a brief Edwardian trend of luncheon societies, where middle and upper-class women met to discuss literature, politics, and suffrage, over a dainty spread of cucumber sandwiches and weak coffee. These gatherings were intellectual rebellion wrapped in sponge cake. Real activism, disguised in doilies. So now, picture this. One man sits down to rabbit tranche in a high-backed chair while another chews cold turnip on a crate behind a textile mill. One woman worries whether her blancmange is too wobbly for her guests, another gulps her potato like it's treasure. It's the same hour. The same city. But worlds apart. And when the bell rings again, your break is over. Not that you ever really got one. You swallow the last mouthful dry, wipe your hands on your apron, and head back to the grind, heartburn and all. You hope dinner will be better. Spoiler, it probably won't. Afternoon routines and the tyranny of time. It's mid-afternoon now. For a fleeting moment, it's the quietest part of the day, right before the children turn into whirlwinds, before dinner prep becomes a battlefield, and before your corset starts feeling like a metal anaconda with abandonment issues. But don't let the calm fool you. This lull is a lie. Afternoon in an Edwardian household is when the illusion of grace is maintained with white-knuckled precision. If you're middle or upper class, this is the hour for nothing. Or, rather, structured nothing. You don't nap. That's vulgar. You rest. Maybe you take tea, maybe you read, but whatever you do, it must look effortless. You sink into a velvet armchair with a novel you're not reading, pretending your spine isn't screaming. Your tea is poured by a maid who's been on her feet since sunrise, and whose idea of rest is standing still long enough to feel the ache in her arches. The drawing room is your arena now. Afternoon light filters through lace curtains, illuminating tiny motes of dust like guilty secrets floating in the air. You sit up straight. You sip delicately. Maybe you embroider a handkerchief for someone you don't like. Maybe you write letters with a fountain pen that leaks ink like it's emotionally unstable. But mostly, you just exist. Decoratively. And here's where it gets twisted. The point of this afternoon downtime isn't leisure, it's performance. You are rehearsing the role of the perfect woman, composed, modest, literate, stylish but not vain, accomplished but not ambitious. You're a symphony of contradictions held together by hat pins and social anxiety. Historians still debate whether this period really offered women more personal time, or just disguised domestic surveillance in better lighting. Now, let's peer into the lives of those not lounging under decorative molding. If you're a servant, your afternoon isn't even a concept. It's just the second act of your 10-part tragedy. You're cleaning ash from the dining room fireplace while trying not to cough. You're starching linens with trembling hands, because a single wrinkle could get you scolded, or worse, replaced. You iron with heavy steel tools heated on a stove, and yes, they burn. You learn quickly not to scream when they do. It's unseemly. Laundry is endless. Sheets must be boiled, whites blued, collars stiffened until they could double as murder weapons. There are no washing machines, just elbow grease, hot water, and the silent prayer that no one gets dysentery from reusing bathwater. Yes, families did that. One bath. Multiple people. No breaks. If you're working class, your afternoon is likely spent running errands, patching clothes, or preparing the evening meal in a kitchen that has the airflow of a coffin and the temperature of a blast furnace. You cook with coal. You cook with anxiety. You cook knowing the meat is mostly gristle and the gravy is doing emotional heavy lifting. Meanwhile, the children, those adorable, buttoned-up cherubs, are finishing their lessons. But don't expect giggles and finger painting. This is Edwardian education, where joy is suspicious and silence is gold. They're being drilled on Latin verbs and the importance of moral hygiene. If they're boys, they're being hardened. If they're girls, softened. One to lead, the other to submit. Equal opportunity was not on the timetable. But here's a fringe tidbit: in some radical households, mostly suffragist or socialist adjacent, afternoons were used for modern parenting. That meant playtime, fresh air, and actually speaking to your children like humans. Revolutionary. Scandalous. The neighbors whispered, of course. Let's not forget the shops. For the lower middle and working class, the afternoon was for messages, errands run by mothers and children. Shopping was a daily chore because no one had refrigerators, and most goods were sold in small, manageable quantities. You stood in line. For flour, then butter, then soap, then back home, hoping you didn't forget anything because you're definitely not making another trip. Also, parcels. So many parcels. You didn't just buy things, you commissioned them. Meats from the butcher, fish from the monger, gloves from the haberdasher. If you're wealthy, these parcels arrive like magic. If you're not, you carry them yourself, sweating through your only good coat, knowing that the grocer is judging your choice of carrots. Even time itself is judged. Upper-class ladies carry tiny watches pinned to their bodices or tucked into chatelaines, little metal belts of accessories that jingle like socially acceptable armor. The working class live by the clock tower or the whistle or the clanging bells from the church down the road. Time isn't yours, it belongs to your employer, your household, your children. It ticks not for pleasure, but for pressure. One strange social habit. Afternoon visits were often considered unimportant. Just enough time to drop off a note, not long enough for a full call. Some women weaponized this. Dropping by at 4:45 p.m. meant you had to leave before tea, subtly signaling that the recipient wasn't worth your best china. Passive aggression, Edwardian style. And if you were old or unwell, you sat near the fire and watched the shadows grow longer. Illness was everywhere, and medicine was a gamble. Afternoon tonics often involved gin, opium, or mysterious brown powders purchased from Dr. Goldstein's miraculous tonic cabinet. One woman's diary mentions taking the afternoon elixir to soothe her nerves. It turned out to be mostly alcohol and morphine. She claimed it helped her embroidery. By 5 o'clock, the house is a different world. The light changes. The pressure builds. Dinner is coming. Guests are coming. Judgments are coming. The calm of the afternoon collapses into the chaos of evening preparation. And all that so-called rest you just enjoyed. It was just the silence before the social storm. Dinner, the most dangerous meal of the day. The bell rings. Again. And it doesn't matter where you are, working class, middle class, or one of the chandelier polishing elite, you move. Because in Edwardian England, dinner is not simply a meal. It's judgment on a plate. It's where reputations are roasted alongside the duck. It's where your social rank is carved in gravy and devoured with silver forks under the flickering gaslight. If you're upper class, the night begins not with food, but with fashion. You don't just get dressed for dinner, you transform. Evening gowns come out of wardrobes smelling faintly of lavender and mothballs. Jewels sparkle as if summoned by debt. Hair is recoiffed, gloves are buttoned, shoes polished until they reflect your rising panic about saying the wrong thing about Portugal. Men don black tailcoats with starched shirt fronts so stiff they could deflect bullets. And given how awkward the conversation might get, that's not a terrible idea. Downstairs, the staff are already in synchronized chaos. The butler is arranging decanters with military precision. The cook is praying the pheasant doesn't overdo by half a minute. And the scullery maid, poor thing, is elbow deep in yesterday's soup pots, working like her life depends on it. It might. You enter the dining room. Candles flicker. Cutlery gleams. The table stretches like a linen-clad runway designed for stilted conversation and silent competition. You don't sit, you're escorted to your seat in a delicate ballet of ranking. Did you marry well? Were you born better? Are you titled? Are you interesting? The answers will decide whether you sit next to a duke or next to his cousin who smells like horses and quotes the Bible over soup. And the food? Oh, the food. This isn't what's for dinner. This is a performance. Multiple courses. Soup, fish, entree, remove, roast, vegetable, sweets, ices, fruit, and finally, mercifully, cheese. Each arrives under domed silver lids with the suspense of a murder mystery. The footmen move like ghosts, trained to be invisible unless they drop a fork, in which case they cease to exist altogether. Don't eat too quickly. Don't eat too slowly. Don't ask what something is. Just chew elegantly and pray that the thing you swallowed wasn't goose liver stuffed with oysters and laced with regret. And now we dive into the real reason dinner is dangerous: conversation. You're expected to speak. But not too much. Be clever, but not smarter than your host. Be charming, but not flirtatious, unless you're rich enough to get away with it. Avoid politics. Avoid religion. But make sure to laugh at Lord Winthrop's joke about the French, even if it makes your brain want to crawl into a tureen of consommé and disappear forever. If you're a woman, this is delicate terrain. Speak well and you're refreshing. Say the wrong thing and you're difficult. Say nothing and you're elegantly reserved. It's a tightrope, with pickled tongue and veal jelly as your safety net. Meanwhile, back in the kitchens, reality. The staff are inhaling cold beef and hot panic. The undercook just dropped a sauce spoon into the fire. The pie crust cracked. The butler is sweating through his collar. And no one, has had time to sit down since dawn. If you're middle class, things are a bit more intimate, but no less stressful. You have dinner in the dining room with your family, possibly with a guest or two who your mother is hoping your sister might one day marry. There's roast meat, potatoes, overcooked greens, and the ever-present fear that your youngest will say something about farts. You use the good china. You speak about school, business, or the times. You make sure the maid doesn't hover too long, because that would be provocative, but also don't let her rush, because that's sloppy. It's exhausting. It's performative. And somehow, it's considered the highlight of your day. And then there's the working class. Dinner is simpler. Boiled meat. Bread. Maybe stew, if you had time. You eat in the same room you sleep in, often on your lap or crowded around a creaky table next to drying laundry. It's loud. It's hot. There are kids fighting and maybe an uncle snoring in the corner who never leaves. But here's the kicker, it's also the most real. People laugh. They talk about actual things. Sometimes they even sing. You know what you don't have? 6 forks, or a wine list, or a footman who flinches when someone laughs too loud. You just have food, family, and the desperate need to stretch one chicken leg into 4 reasonable bites. Here's a strange little custom. In wealthier homes, servants weren't supposed to chew loudly even when eating alone. They were trained to chew silently, heads down, as if being grateful required absolute invisibility. Some households even insisted that maids turn to the wall when not serving. Yes, literally face the wall. Like Victorian timeout, but for existing. And let's not forget the children's table, that miserable, wobbly offshoot where the young, the awkward, and the not quite good enough are exiled. You sit there, listening to laughter from the adults' table, wondering if your peas are colder or your dignity is just thawing. Dinner winds down with port, cigars, if you're male, and parlor games, if you're female and still awake. Guests depart. You compliment the food. You lie. Everyone lies. It's the only thing more polite than the napkin fold. And upstairs, someone writes in her diary that she didn't eat a thing and no one noticed. Meanwhile, downstairs, someone cries over a burnt finger and is told to be grateful to have a position. Dinner is over. Thank heavens. Until tomorrow night, when the circus comes to town again, this time with duck. Evening entertainment, or how boredom wears a cravat. The dishes are cleared, the guests are gone, or politely herded into the drawing room, and now it's time for entertainment, which sounds fun, until you remember this is Edwardian England, where fun is mostly about decorum, endurance, and pretending not to fall asleep while someone plays the harpsichord like it's an emergency. If you're upper class, your evening begins in the drawing room. A fire crackles. Lamps are dim just enough to flatter the wallpaper and blur your wrinkles. You recline in a chair that's more decorative than comfortable, sip port you don't particularly like, and prepare to suffer politely through the evening program. That might mean a reading. Someone's niece reciting Tennyson like she's holding in a sneeze, or music, a trembling waltz played on an over-polished piano by a girl who's been practicing all week just to be ignored by Lord Granville. The expectations are absurd. If you're a woman, you must pretend you enjoy singing a breathless aria in front of a room full of judgmental peers, even if you're shaking inside and just trying not to sweat through your bodice. One cracked note and you're branded nervous. Too confident, and you're common. Performance was never just talent, it was a litmus test for class, breeding, and emotional self-mummification. And don't even think about saying no when someone hands you sheet music. Refusing to perform was considered rude. Unless you were very rich, in which case, refusing was chic. Meanwhile, if you're a gentleman, you might excuse yourself to the smoking room. Finally, cigars, brandy, and the comfortable silence of men pretending they have deep thoughts. Topics of conversation include horse racing, political rumors, whether the Germans are being cheeky again, and how women simply aren't built for logic. someone inevitably mentions how terribly modern everything's becoming. The irony is that he says this while adjusting his monocle and chain-smoking Turkish cigarettes. For the middle class, entertainment is a little less grand but no less curated. Maybe you play charades. Maybe a brother awkwardly plays the violin. Maybe there's a new parlor game from the ladies' weekly companion, such as, Guess the Colonial Capital, or, Can you pass this silver spoon without dropping it? Spoiler, you probably can't, and someone ends up weeping into a doily. You might also read aloud. Yes, read. Aloud. Together. Novels, moral tales, newspaper articles, anything deemed suitably improving. One person reads while the others sit silently, drinking weak tea and trying not to fall asleep or die of second-hand Dickens. If you laugh at the wrong part, you're uncultured. If you don't laugh at all, you're ungrateful. It's not so much entertainment as hostage situation with embroidery. Now, let's peek into the homes of the working class. Their evenings are louder, livelier, and yes, realer. After dinner, which we've already established is more survival than celebration, the family might gather around the hearth. Someone sings. Someone else tells stories, often made up, exaggerated, or shamelessly borrowed. Laughter is common. So is exhaustion. Maybe someone breaks out a fiddle. Maybe you listen to the ticking of the wall clock and just exist together, finally not running, not serving, not pretending. But even here, joy has its boundaries. There's mending to do, boots to clean, shirts to press for tomorrow. The children are put to bed in shared rooms, sometimes 2 or 3 to a mattress. You whisper lullabies while scraping candle wax off a chipped saucer, and then you sit for 5 golden minutes in total stillness, staring at nothing. That's your entertainment. And it's not nothing. It's everything. Now let's talk about theater, because if you're lucky, or rebellious, or just bored enough, you might sneak out to a show. For the upper crust, that means opera or Shakespeare, where you dress in satins and pretend you understand iambic pentameter while discreetly nodding off. For the working class, it's the music hall, bawdy songs, slapstick sketches, cheap drinks, and real laughter. Imagine burlesque, jokes about public toilets, a strong man in a singlet, and a woman who can balance a chair on her nose while singing about mashed peas. It's crude. It's wild. It's fun. And your mother would be appalled. Historians still argue whether these nightly rituals, readings, recitals, games, were genuinely enriching or just mechanisms for enforcing social discipline. Maybe both. Either way, everyone was expected to perform in some fashion. Even not participating was a performance. Try slouching in a parlor chair and saying, "No, I don't enjoy poetry," see how fast you're socially buried. Here's a strange tidbit, some fashionable households hired living entertainment. Literally. Professional reciters, amateur musicians for hire, or even conversation guests, people paid to sit at your dinner party and sound interesting. Imagine being paid to be charming. Actually, that might be your dream job. As the hour creeps toward 10 or 11, the energy dips. People yawn behind fans or cough meaningfully. Someone suggests a game of whist that everyone pretends to look forward to. You fake a second wind. You smile. You pour more sherry. But inside, you're already halfway into your nightgown and dreaming of boots that don't pinch. For the servants, of course, the evening is far from over. There's cleanup. There are dishes to scrub, tablecloths to shake, lamps to trim, and rooms to close down. Only when every fireplace is banked and every door relatched do they crawl into narrow beds beneath attic beams. No songs. No books. Just sleep, and even that's borrowed time. And so, Edwardian entertainment ends not with a bang, but a sigh. Whether you're humming a hymn, folding napkins, or sipping your 5th port while the dog sleeps on your shoe, you've survived another evening in a society where even relaxing is a performance. Tomorrow, you do it all again. Bedrooms, privacy is a privilege. The lamps are dimmed, corsets unhooked, and the house exhales. It's late now, officially bedtime, though what that means depends wildly on your place in the Edwardian pyramid. For some, it's a velvet-lined retreat into silk sheets and serene stillness. For others, it's a freezing attic crawlspace shared with 4 siblings and a mouse named Ambition. But one thing is universal: bedrooms aren't just where you sleep. They're where secrets settle, and where the rigid order of the day slowly unravels, unless you're too tired to notice. If you're upper class, congratulations, you have a bedroom suite. Yes, suite. Plural. You might even have separate bedrooms for husband and wife, which sounds odd until you remember that marriages among the elite were often arranged, strategic, and about as romantic as a bank merger. You sleep apart not because you're estranged, but because your bed linens cost more than the maid's yearly wage, and you don't want anyone wrinkling your embroidery. Your bedroom is likely upstairs, away from noise, wrapped in layers of drapery and status. A personal maid or valet helps you undress, because of course your clothes are too complex to remove unassisted. You've got 20 buttons, whalebone stays, detachable cuffs, maybe even a wig stand. Undressing is a team sport. The mattress is stuffed with horsehair, and your pillowcases are monogrammed. There's a jug of lukewarm water for washing, and if you're especially lucky, or especially rich, a ceramic hot water bottle to warm your toes. Privacy is respected. Doors are knocked on. Whispered conversations float through keyholes. Everyone pretends not to hear them. Meanwhile, in the servant quarters, privacy is a rumor. Your bed, if you have one to yourself, is probably straw-filled and slightly damp. If you're in a country house, you sleep under the eaves, where the wind hisses through cracks in the roof tiles and owls sound suspiciously like burglars. There's no lock on your door. Maybe no door at all. Just a curtain. Or nothing. And don't even dream of sleeping in. Servants rise before dawn. That means lights out fast, and forget nighttime rituals. No skincare. No reading. No me time. You sleep in your underclothes to save time dressing at 5 a.m. Your blanket might be shared. Your dreams, if you have any, are cut short by bells. For the working class, the situation's more crowded. Families of 6, 7, even 10 might live in 2 rooms. Not 2 bedrooms. 2 rooms. Beds are shared. If you're the oldest child, you're lucky to have a side. If you're the youngest, you're the foot warmer. Some families hang blankets from the ceiling to make sleeping zones. Others don't bother. Sleep is communal, loud, smelly, and non-negotiable. A twisted fact. Many poor families rented beds by the hour. Known as hot beds, they were literally warm from the last sleeper. You worked the night shift. Someone else worked the day shift. Perfect, share the same space like an industrial timeshare, just don't ask about lice. Now, back to the gentry. You might think having a lovely bedchamber means a peaceful night. But here's the Gothic twist: it's never really quiet. Edwardian houses creak. Pipes knock. Foxes scream like tortured infants. And somewhere, a maid is coughing with what might be tuberculosis. You lie there wondering if it's the wind, or something older. Something that remembers when the manor was built. Night also brings emotional echoes. Repressed grief. Failed engagements. Unspoken fears. You think Victorian repression died with Queen Vicky? Think again. Edwardians just hid it behind better upholstery. You're alone now, lying on embroidered linens, staring at the ceiling, wondering if your husband really did go to his club, or if he's with the widow who reads Swinburne and laughs too loud. Some people read. Or journal. Or pray. Prayer is a big one, particularly among middle-class women, who are taught that devotion makes suffering more elegant. Offer it up, they're told, as if exhaustion is a holy offering. There's also the nightly ritual of hair care. Women brush their hair exactly 100 times. Not 99. Not 101. 100. It's believed to stimulate the scalp, encourage beauty, and distract from the fact that you haven't been alone all day until now. And if you're married? Well, that's when the real performance begins, or doesn't. Conjugal visits are expected. Requested. Or, in many cases, just assumed. Love may or may not be present. Consent is a concept still emerging from beneath centuries of entitlement. If you refuse your husband too often, it's noted. If you seem too eager, it's whispered about. There's no winning, just surviving the mattress diplomacy of married life. Historians still argue whether separate bedrooms gave women more autonomy, or just offered men more excuses to wander. Either way, it's telling that the wealthier you were, the more doors you had between yourself and other people's expectations. Let's not forget the quirky fringe dwellers, artists, spinsters, widows with pensions, who created odd little nighttime worlds of their own. One woman famously slept in a hammock instead of a bed because she believed it trained the body for moral balance. Another stuffed dried herbs into her pillows to ward off inappropriate dreams. Some sewed until 2 a.m. by candlelight. Not because they had to, but because that was the only time they were truly alone. And then, gradually, the gaslights flicker out. The coals in the hearth sigh and settle. Someone sneezes into the dark. Someone else whispers goodnight to no one in particular. The city beyond the walls groans and shudders, breathing steam and soot and sorrow. And whether you're nestled in Egyptian cotton or curled under a scratchy wool blanket with a sibling's foot in your face, eventually, you sleep. Because tomorrow, it all begins again. Dreams, nightmares, and Edwardian insomnia. The world has gone quiet, or at least, it's trying. Midnight drapes itself over rooftops, chimneys puff their last smoky sighs, and the winding, soot-smudged streets of Edwardian England sink into uneasy stillness. But just because the lights are out doesn't mean the mind is. In fact, for many Edwardians, night is when the real trouble begins. Sleep. That's a luxury. For most, it's either fleeting, haunted, or outright elusive. Because while the Edwardian day was rigid, ordered, scheduled to the minute, the night. That's when order breaks down. And dreams don't follow etiquette. Let's start upstairs, figuratively and literally, with the wealthy. You, tucked into a four-poster bed, satin quilt pulled to your chin, feel the velvet silence pressing in. But your thoughts are louder now than the chatter of the dinner table or the ticking of the drawing room clock. You stare at the ceiling, counting cracks like sins. You think of letters unsent, debts unpaid, children growing up too fast, or not well enough. Your husband might already be snoring, or away, or in the next room entirely, dreaming of fox hunts and cigar smoke. You're dreaming wide awake. The gaslight's off, but your guilt isn't. Insomnia was a known nuisance among the Edwardian elite, so much so that nervous disorders became their own genre of medicine. The solution? Laudanum. Chlorodyne. Alcohol. Or a rest cure, code for lying very still while doctors make guesses and your maid cries quietly in the hallway. One upper-class woman famously kept a notebook by her bed to write down her midnight thoughts, convinced she was receiving messages from a dead cousin. Another believed eating celery at 9 p.m. prevented night terrors. These are your role models now. Of course, the downstairs world has no such luxury. If you're a servant, you don't have time for proper dreams. Sleep, when it comes, is a slam of unconsciousness, brutal, brief, stolen. You hit the mattress and vanish. No candlelit musings. Just 5 hours, if you're lucky, before the scullery bell rings and the real world drags you back like a jealous lover. But that doesn't mean you're free from nightmares. In fact, if you live in a city like London or Manchester, your nightmares might sound like real life. Rats scratching in the walls. Carriages clattering down cobblestone streets. A drunk stumbling outside, shouting half-mad poetry to the moon. Your dreams blend with the noise. You don't know where one ends and the other begins. And if you're in the working class, living 3 to a bed, lungs raw from factory dust, stomach still aching from bread that wasn't quite enough, your dreams often come in desperate flashes. A turkey dinner. A clean dress. A job that doesn't kill you. Maybe even a home with your own room. These dreams feel warm. Possible. Until you wake to the same sagging ceiling and the same chill in your bones. Historians still argue whether Edwardians truly slept less, or just rested differently. Some studies suggest they had segmented sleep, waking at 2 a.m. to stoke fires or think quietly, then drifting back off until dawn. Others say that's just romanticizing poverty-induced insomnia. Either way, nobody's sleeping 8 hours straight unless they're rich, dead, or both. But not all dreams are bad. Some, rare, fragile things, offer escape. A middle-class boy might dream of becoming a gentleman, wearing a top hat and correcting someone's Latin. A young maid might dream she owns the very house she scrubs every day, directing other maids with a brass bell and a soft smile. These aren't just wishes. They're survival mechanisms. A dream can get you through a week of cold mutton and calloused hands. There's also the matter of ghost stories. Because the Edwardians loved ghosts. They feared them, yes, but they adored the idea that life didn't quite end when the candles went out. Spiritualism was in fashion, seances were held in parlors lit only by trembling candelabras, and dream interpretation was a full-time hobby for bored widows and dabbling academics alike. So when you dream of your dead aunt, speaking, reaching, warning, you don't wake in panic. You wake in curiosity. You write it down. You tell your friend at lunch. You consult the family medium. If your dream says to avoid green apples, you skip the fruit and feel morally superior all week. But there's also the darker side of night, the night terrors no one speaks of. The man who returns from war and wakes screaming. The woman who relives childbirth again and again in her sleep. The child who flinches at shadows because he knows they sometimes move. There is no word for PTSD. Just nerves. No diagnosis for anxiety, only hysteria, and the patronizing promise that a nice rest will fix it. Spoiler, it won't. And remember, light is expensive. Candles cost money. Gaslight is metered. You don't just burn it because you feel a little edgy at 2 a.m. You sit in the dark, hoping your thoughts don't get too loud. Here's a quirky detail: some Edwardians believed sleeping with your mouth open invited demons, or, worse, mice. So women were taught to bind their jaws with ribbon while they slept. It looked dainty. It felt like suffocation. Fashionable paranoia, but make it lethal. And the bedding itself? Well, if you're rich, it's feather-stuffed, monogrammed, gently lavender-scented. If you're not, it's rough wool, straw, and the distant memory of clean linen. One family was known to rotate their one good pillow among the children on a weekly basis. That's love, Edwardian style, conditional, rotating, and slightly musty. Eventually, though, sleep wins. You fade. Into dream or oblivion. Into visions of garden parties or broken teeth. Into flying or falling or waking up naked at the vicar's tea. Freud would have had a field day, but he was just beginning to creep into drawing rooms like an unwelcome psychic with boundary issues. And when the horizon begins to brighten, when the coal fires cough back to life, and the milk cart clatters down the street, you stir. You stretch. You sigh. And you rise, not because you're rested, but because you have to. The morning after, beauty, breath, and boiling water. It begins with a sound. Not birdsong, not some gentle rustle of morning breeze against gauzy curtains, but something closer to a cowbell being whacked against your conscience. The scullery bell. The coal cart outside. A chamber pot lid. A housemaid coughing up Edwardian air pollution like a Victorian saxophone. You're awake. But you're not ready. No one ever is. If you're a servant, the day begins before sunrise. You wake in darkness. Literally. You fumble for your stockings in the gloom. You dress without a mirror. And you move quietly, because above you, several floors up, sleep people whose dreams are apparently sacred, unlike yours, which were rudely interrupted by foot cramps and a neighbor snoring in Morse code. First job, fire. Always the fire. Grates must be cleaned, coals shoveled, ashes dumped. You do this before breakfast, before light, before you've even had time to remember you have a name. If you're new to service, this might be the moment you weep softly into a bucket. If you're seasoned, you've learned to suppress the urge until at least your second scalded hand of the day. Now, for the gentry. Your morning begins not with labor, but with warm water. Carried by someone else. In a porcelain jug. You do not boil it. You do not pour it. You simply nod as it's placed on your washstand by a girl who hasn't slept properly since New Year's. You rise slowly. Your bedroom is chilly, but not outside chilly. The kind of chilly you can fix with a robe and a huff. You slip into slippers. You approach the mirror. And now begins the morning routine, Edwardian style, an exhausting performance in the theater of class, complete with creams, powders, and lies. Toilet water is splashed onto your face, not actual toilet water, though confusingly close in naming conventions. Cold cream is applied with trembling fingers, partly from age, partly from caffeine withdrawal. You brush your hair, at least 50 strokes, until it shines or your arm gives out. If you're ambitious, you pluck your eyebrows. With tweezers. By candlelight. While contemplating mortality. Teeth. Cleaned with crushed chalk or powdered charcoal, rubbed with a cloth, and rinsed with something that smells like sadness and peppermint schnapps. Historians still argue whether Edwardians had better oral hygiene than Victorians, but one thing's for sure, if your breath didn't knock someone unconscious, you were already ahead of the game. Working-class families didn't bother with such luxuries. You woke. You dressed. You hoped no one had stolen your boots in the night. Water, if it came, was cold and shared. You splashed it on your face like someone trying to forget they just slept 3 to a bed. No creams. No silk robes. Just a stiff collar and another day to survive. And if you're a woman, sweet listener, your morning is a minefield of corsets and social traps. Step 1, undergarments. Chemise, drawers, petticoats. Maybe a corset cover. Maybe 2. You layer up like you're going to war, because you are, against physics, circulation, and dignity. Step 2, the corset itself. A medieval contraption of whalebone and ambition, designed to cinch your waist, prop up your bust, and flatten your spirit. Laced by your maid, who, if she likes you, pulls gently. If she doesn't, well, let's just say you'll be breathing like a Victorian soprano for the rest of the day. Some women fainted. Others just got really, really good at shallow breathing and emotional repression. One fringe health guru insisted corsets could channel sinful thoughts into posture. She later died of liver damage, probably from being hugged too tightly by her own ribs. Now dressed, you face the next battle, breakfast. But if you're a servant, you don't eat. Not yet. First, you set the tables. Light the lamps. Dust the sideboards. Brew the tea. Toast the bread. And pray you don't drop the marmalade, because good orange marmalade costs more than your mother's best hat. For the upper crust, breakfast is simple, but not casual. You eat in the breakfast room, often in silence, unless someone's in the mood for chatter, in which case the conversation will orbit around colonial politics, the weather, or how terribly vulgar it is that some women now wear trousers. You spread jam on toast like it's a metaphor. You sip tea with all the boredom of someone who hasn't made it themselves in 20 years. A quirky tidbit: Edwardians believed strongly in the power of airing out. That meant opening the windows, even in winter, to refresh the lungs. Many households had their maids throw open the sashes at dawn, then stand guard while their employers gasped like goldfish in the Arctic breeze. Health, apparently, came wrapped in pneumonia. Meanwhile, in a working-class home, breakfast is bread. Maybe porridge. Tea if you're lucky. Coffee if you're radical. The stove barely heats. Your fingers are stiff. You eat quickly, because the factory doesn't care how little you slept, and the streets aren't exactly paved with patience. And speaking of work, the morning rush is its own ritual. Office clerks pin on collars. Seamstresses stitch their fingers while dressing. Children bolt out with homework clutched in teeth. Everything is late. Everything is urgent. Everything is layered with fear, of the boss, of the client, of falling behind. Here's a twisted truth: most Edwardians did not rise and shine. They rose and survived. Some rose hungry. Others rose hungover. Some rose into privilege, others into filth. The day began not with promise, but pressure. And still, they moved forward. The milkman whistles. The newspaper boy shouts. The boots are laced. The gaslights flicker off. The curtains are drawn back. And the great Edwardian stage resets. Because every morning is a chance to pretend all over again. That you're healthy. That you're happy. That your waist is naturally 22 inches and you actually enjoyed that porridge. And as you step into your polished shoes or scuffed work boots, the day begins again, not because you're ready, but because you must. School days, manners drills, and the weaponization of politeness. You're up, you're dressed, and the house is humming with barely managed chaos. Whether you're a child with ribbons in your hair or a governess holding a pen like it's a sword, the morning now shifts into one of the Edwardian household's most sacred, scrutinized, and occasionally soul-crushing rituals: education. If you're a child in an upper-class family, congratulations, your future will be paved with Latin, social lies, and tennis matches. But don't get too comfortable. Your day isn't exactly frolics in the garden. It's education by etiquette, drilled into you like wallpaper paste. You don't go to the local school, of course. No, heaven forbid. You have a governess. She lives in the house but belongs nowhere in it, not quite a servant, not quite family. She teaches you everything from Greek mythology to how to speak to inferiors without looking directly at them. She's stern, often unmarried, and powered entirely by tea and unprocessed disappointment. She teaches in the morning room, at a small desk by the window, where light pours in like judgment. And if you're a girl, your lessons are extra, specialized. Arithmetic, yes, but also embroidery, deportment, how to walk without jostling the soul, music, French, and, of course, manners. How to curtsy. How to eat asparagus with dignity. How to enter a room as if you were gliding on divine permission. Education, for girls, is less about empowerment and more about grooming for one specific job, being marriageable before your teeth fall out. Now let's peer into the lives of the middle class. You attend school. Probably a private one, if your parents can afford it. Uniforms, ink-stained fingers, stiff-backed desks. Boys learn Latin, geography, and how to prepare for a future in insurance or polite misery. Girls, again, learn ladylike arts and just enough math to not embarrass themselves at dinner. You're expected to recite. To memorize. To know your place. Raise your hand. Only if you're sure your answer won't cause a scene. Speak boldly. Only if it sounds like your father wrote it. Emotional expression is fine in poetry, but not in the classroom. You sit up straight. You nod. You hope you don't get called on to explain the causes of the Boer War when your brain is still stuck on what exactly a tuffet is and why Miss Havisham was so sticky. Now, the twist. Edwardian schools were obsessed with order. Silence wasn't just encouraged, it was enforced. Children sat in rows, often segregated by gender, drilled in facts and morality at the same time. You could get caned for slouching, kept after for whispering, and humiliated publicly for not knowing your irregular French verbs. And that was just Monday. But what about the working class? Here's where the romantic lens cracks. Elementary education was technically compulsory, but in reality, it was a toss-up. Many children worked. Others went to school just long enough to learn how to sign their name and then were sent to earn bread or coal dust. Schools were overcrowded. Underfunded. Teachers were exhausted. And yet, there was hope there. Real hope. Because for these kids, school wasn't just a legal requirement. It was a possible escape hatch. You sit on a splintery bench. You copy words from a slate. You learn to read not because someone insists, but because you want more than this. The teacher's coat is frayed. The classroom smells like wet wool and ink. But when the reader opens and the words come alive, you feel your mind lift. Briefly. Quietly. Enough to keep going. Now let's dive into one of the era's favorite school subjects, manners. Yes, manners were treated like academic gospel. Posture was graded. Table behavior was discussed like international diplomacy. There were even manuals, hundreds of them, detailing how to sneeze politely, how to write thank you notes, yes, even for socks, and how to carry oneself with noble restraint even in the face of soup-based catastrophe. One actual book advised young ladies that the best way to impress a suitor was to move as though gliding over music. Another warned boys that no future statesman ever wiped his nose with his sleeve. Historians still debate whether Edwardian politeness was genuine moral structure, or just social anxiety in a monocle. And then there were the exams. The horror. The ink blots. The utter unfairness of being expected to remember how many colonies the empire had while still missing 2 front teeth. Failure wasn't just academic, it was personal. Middle-class children feared poor grades not just for their own sake, but because it might embarrass the family. Honor was wrapped up in spelling tests and geography quizzes. Here's a fringe tidbit: some progressive schools, like the ones founded by Fabian socialists or Quaker reformers, actually banned punishment. Imagine that. No rulers. No dunce caps. Just compassion. Radical stuff. Of course, these schools were seen as suspiciously modern and were often attended by children with names like Peregrine and Theodora, who later became playwrights or disappeared into Italy with a lover and a sketchbook. But for the majority, school was a place of fear, structure, and performance. A mirror of the adult world. Sit still. Repeat after me. Don't ask too many questions. Learn how to be before you learn how to think. And if you're lucky, you come out of it literate, polite, employable, and only mildly traumatized. As the school day ends, you shuffle home, book satchel clutched, boots muddy, eyes heavy. Maybe you learned something useful. Maybe you memorized a poem you'll forget by Thursday. But either way, you've done your part in the great Edwardian training simulator, also known as life. Tomorrow, you do it all again. The end of the day, secrets, shadows, and the art of pretending. The sky bruises violet. The gas lamps flicker back to life. It's evening now, again, and the Edwardian house begins its descent into ritual, repetition, and repression. But don't be fooled by the lace curtains and polished brass. The day might be over, but the performances are not. If anything, this is when they deepen. This is when the masks grow tighter, the truths grow quieter, and the real drama curls under the floorboards like forgotten smoke. For the upper class, the end of the day is a cool-down act. You return from dinner parties, or perhaps you hosted one. You're still faintly buzzed on claret and compliments you suspect were sarcastic. You sweep into your bedroom, remove your gloves like peeling off a persona, and sink into the soft silence of wealth. But even here, in silk and satin and someone else's labor, there are cracks. Maybe your husband hasn't come home. Maybe he's downstairs, pretending to read while secretly composing a letter to that widow with the knowing smile. Maybe you are the one with the secret, with the drawer full of unmailed poems and a longing that never made it into your diary. You undress with help. Always help. That's the Edwardian way, intimacy without warmth. Your maid unhooks your gown, unlaces your corset, folds your garments into perfectly judged piles that smell like starch and sorrow. She says nothing. You say even less. She knows you cry sometimes. You know she's never paid on time. You're both prisoners. Just in different cells. Downstairs, the staff is exhaling. The kitchen smells like bleach and fatigue. The undercook burns her fingers on a pan someone forgot to scrub. The butler removes his gloves one finger at a time like a priest shedding guilt. The scullery maid, barely 15, sits in a corridor with her head against the wall, too tired to cry. She'll rise again before sunrise. No dreams. No reprieve. Just another circle around this weary carousel. And in the middle class? The day ends in a flurry of half-done things. Shoes cleaned for tomorrow. Books packed. A letter left open on the bureau, carefully unfinished so it looks spontaneous. A child's spelling test marked with a red, well done, even though it wasn't. The mother sits at the dining table, counting receipts. The father stares into the hearth, thinking about the promotion he didn't get, the bill he hasn't paid, the bottle he shouldn't open. And for the working class? Well, the day never really ends. You eat your supper, thin stew, bread crusts, maybe a dab of butter if you're lucky, and then it's straight to chores. Laundry. Patching. Washing faces. Boiling water for the next day. You carry your exhaustion like a coat you can't afford to replace. And yet, somehow, there's laughter. A joke shared between siblings. A song hummed from memory. A ragdoll mended with such care it might as well be a Faberge egg. Joy, in this class, isn't served. It's foraged. Small. Resilient. Absolutely essential. Now let's peel back one more curtain. The end of the Edwardian day is haunted by things unspoken. The letters never sent. The love never declared. The child never born. The illness ignored. The truth silenced. Because in this world, beautiful, brittle, and bound by etiquette, truth is dangerous. You're expected to smile when you want to scream. You're expected to bow when you'd rather run. You're told that appearances are everything. And so, every night, people lie themselves to sleep. And yet, some resist. A governess stashes away secret stories she's written under a false name. A young man writes poetry he hides inside the piano. A footman teaches himself Shakespeare by candlelight and dares to dream of acting, on a stage, not in service. These are the quiet rebellions. They're never printed in the society pages. But they are everywhere. Flickering like candle flames behind every polished window. Historians still debate whether the Edwardians were truly as repressed as we believe, or whether their emotional restraint was a cultural armor. Maybe they weren't colder. Just better at pretending. Maybe we only see the teacups and top hats, but miss the weight of what they carried inside. And here's a twisted tidbit: some families kept journals, not for themselves, but for posterity. Entire books written with the future in mind, curated, controlled, false. They lied to history. On purpose. Imagine ending your day by rewriting it into something more palatable for great-grandchildren you'll never meet. It's less a diary, more a performance. Like everything else. And so, the lamps go out. The coals settle in the hearth. A cat brushes past your ankle in the dark, reminding you there's still something untamed in the world. And whether you're tucked into linen sheets or curled beneath scratchy wool, the silence finally settles. Thick. Sacred. Undeniably honest. The day has ended. The roles are paused. But tomorrow, the curtains rise again. Because in the Edwardian world, you are always being watched. Even when you think no one sees.